As we begin this hearing on credit scores and reports, we must recognize that the American consumer faces a very different landscape than 30 years ago. Credit cards are so widespread that they are routinely marketed to college students. Your local bank, that is, if you're lucky enough to have one in your neighborhood, is more than likely owned by the same faceless Wall Street corporation that you can shop for loans and car insurance online, something that wasn't even imagined 30 years ago. In large part, what has made all this possible are the now ubiquitous credit scores and reports created and provided largely by companies that sit before us today. Driven by an increasingly impersonal and homogenized lending environment, lenders, insurance companies, utilities, and even cell phone companies are relying more and more on credit scores and reports to determine whether a consumer is worthy of their attention and indeed their services. I know the increased use of credit scores has expanded credit to previously ineligible borrowers, and the standardization of the system has minimized some of the bias present in our economy. But the system has created new concerns and dangers for consumers, especially if you're Black or Latino, that we should address. A good credit score and a correspondingly favorable credit report have become the passport to a stable economic future for today's consumer. But these passports are being issued by thousands of private, for-profit companies that few can identify, using opaque formulas that are hidden from the American people and hidden from Congress. In a democracy, there is something unseemly in having one's life judged and possibly even guided, no matter how benignly or unintentionally, by private for-profit companies through a system where it is impossible for one to opt out. This fact alone causes me to doubt the fairness of our current system and structure. For instance, as Mr. Hendricks will mention in his testimonies, consumers are not commonly allowed to access to the scores that lenders and other financial consumers of data actually use to make lending decisions. Let me repeat that. For instance, as we will hear in testimony today, consumers, Americans, are not commonly allowed access to the scores that lenders and other institutional consumers of data actually use to make lending decisions. Instead, you are sold an educational score. That is not the score used by the lender to determine necessarily your credit card rate can be different than that used to determine the rate for qualifying for. So what's going on is that they're selling you a product that is never really used to make any decision about your credit worthiness. How is that educational? On top of that, lenders use their own private data to further determine what rate or fee they want to charge a consumer. For an industry that is supposed to be focused solely on accuracy and predictability, there seems to be quite a bit of effort going on behind the scenes to prevent consumers from seeing things as they really work. Americans do not know where these scores are coming from and how they are created. I have strong reservations about allowing the use of credit reports to determine employability and insurance fees. For example, 22% of Latinos in America have thin files that are given a worse rate for loans and insurance and can even lead to them being rejected for a loan. At a time when Americans are dealing with 10% unemployment rates, which is in fact actually higher in many communities across America, I do not believe that our constituents should have to worry about whether or not their credit report is entirely accurate, or even worry about it when they should be focused on finding a new way to pay their rent and feed their kids. We shouldn't allow the secrecy of our current system to affect consumers' livelihood without their knowing the rules of the game and what they can do about it before it's too late. Consumers should know that a medical debt that they already paid off will affect their credit for 7 years to come, or that being away on military service in Iraq, in Afghanistan, protecting this country might not be much of a mitigating factor for the credit bureaus and institutional consumers of credit scores and reports, as recent immigrant creditworthiness is often lower than the general population, regardless of how good their credit history was in their home country. These are just some of the concerns that make it clear that the current system has not reached acceptable levels of fairness or transparency. Finally, I have concern that with banks and others taking credit away from consumers due to the bank's own problems, not those of the consumer, your formulas are not accurately predicting a consumer's true likelihood of default. Just because some bank is consolidating their credit lines they have out there for all their consumers doesn't mean that every single one of them is a greater credit risk. There are many legislative proposals circulating right now on credit scores and reports. Some I have co-sponsored and some I plan to introduce myself. We will be holding further hearings on these proposals after we give a harder look at credit-based insurance scores in the near future. Many of these concerns that I have are with institutional consumers of credit scores and reports, so that I can assure you we will be inviting them to sit down and have their own discussion with our subcommittee about this as well. I guess basically, I don't know that if I'm a good driver of a car, I check the locks on my house every night and I make sure that the electricity's up to date and the gas is working good and I got my roof, why I should pay more for my insurance on my house. I go 55 and a 55, don't go through red lights, put my turn signals on when I'm supposed to, and I'm a good driver, I don't think I should pay more for car insurance. Yet, because people are using credit scores, so if I'm one of those 40 million Americans without health care insurance, or the tens of millions of Americans without any job, and I become ill for 7 years, that illness, I was just thinking before I came up here, when I was in school, I used to be able to go to the teacher and say, you know, I was out for 2 weeks, I was sick. So she gave me time to make up so I could study, so there could be a true reflection of who I was and what grade I should receive. But in America, if you get sick, you just can't take I got a sick card or a note from your doctor to the credit bureaus and say, by the way, don't tell everybody I'm a bad credit risk. I was sick. I mean, if that's the way we dealt with employment at the end of the year, I know that if I had an employee and they were sick in the hospital, sick, they were gone for a couple of months, I don't think I would evaluate them on their absence during those 2 months. Yet, credit scores are routinely used if people get sick, because for 7 years it takes for them to fix that. Now some will say, oh, well, you know, they didn't pay it. Yeah, well, they were out of a job. They were sick. It was something beyond their control. They were ill. And in America, I just think a credit score shouldn't be used for that, especially when it's going to determine how much you pay for other products, not for a job. Now, if you're in a job interview, you might be able to explain, but you don't know, because someone somewhere is using that. So with that, I'm going to close my opening statement and yield to Mr. Henseling.